Welcome to the show. This is Arseni Talks.
This is Brian, and this is Ian.
Nice to
No,
meet you.
of course, hello to Ian. We wouldn't be here if Ian wasn't here. I wouldn't be here.
Thank you very much, Ian. Really appreciate it.
Okay, get yourself some pudding. The pudding is in the fridge. Hello, Azani.
Hello, Brian.
So, it's good to see you.
Yes.
You sent a very strange photograph on your phone link because you look like Buddhist monk in
Yeah,
orange glasses. Did you go Buddhist?
no, it's my like position. It's a generated picture of me, and it's just my avatar.
Oh, I see. So, uh, this avatar walks invisibly beside you in an orange Buddhist gown, yeah?
Yeah, of course.
Uh,
Let's just start from the beginning. Okay. Um, we met today Brian Hatton. Brian is a historian of art and architecture, lecturer, and critic. You are take part of Architectural Association of Liverpool, John Moore University, where you run a regular course. Your covers topics such as contemporary British architecture, the relationship between sculpture and architecture. I met Brian nearly 10 years ago in St. Petersburg. He came there in 2015 to run his course and visit cultural and historical places around St. Petersburg. Okay, Brian, tell me please, where and how did your interest in architecture first has begun?
okay. Uh, this is a very long story. Um, my earliest memory of anything to do with architecture was that when I was about 5 years old, um, we lived in a typical old 19th century English street, what we call Terrace Street, no gardens. And I remember the stones the floor was made of, sandstone and what we call flagstone, and cast iron drain pipes. I had always a very strong sense of physical buildings. And then a little bit older, maybe 6 going to 7, um, I had a little children's comic book, comic magazine that arrived each week. It had your jobs tomorrow, and it had a description of the job of a bricklayer. And I like this idea, cement, brick, cement, brick, cement, brick. It's my idea of a good physical job. I was in a working class family, and I didn't know about being an architect. Um, and then we moved up to a suburban house with a big garden. And I got very interested in digging little roads in the ground in our big garden and made a miniature city with little roads. And I got very interested in books about archaeology, digging up old towns. And so I started to bury my toys and come back some weeks later and dig them up like they were in Pompeii or some old town in Crimea or something like that,
Oh, well.
or old Egypt. I got very interested in Egypt and Greece. They were my favorite ancient countries. And but of course, I was in a working class town, so I didn't know nobody had a job as an archaeologist. Uh, it's like saying, "Oh, what do you want to be for a job when you grow up?" "Oh, I will be a cosmonaut." Well, being an archaeologist or a cosmonaut, not much difference.
Yeah, of course.
One is going into the distant past, and the other is going into distant space. It was a fantastic idea, so I could never professionally think about that. The funny thing is, I can't say that I had a big feeling for contemporary architecture or even Renaissance architecture. I got interested in English Gothic churches, and I remember we visited the old historical town of Chester, near Liverpool, which has a wonderful medieval cathedral, not very tall and grand, but with a lot of extensions because it was a kind of monastery with a cloister. I love cloisters. I still love cloisters. So I started to design little churches and monasteries on the plan. And I also had dominoes, the game of dominoes, little black and white. And I used to make um, imaginary cities out of these.
Hmm.
I read about the palace of Knossos in Crete with the labyrinth and the Minotaur monster in the middle of this labyrinth. And I tried to make one. So I had lots of ideas about architecture, but again, never occurred to me to be an architect. And then when I was about 9 years old, I discovered chemistry. And I loved chemistry. For 5 or 6 years, I was very, very good at it.
Mhm.
Um, and I really thought I would be a chemist or a chemical engineer. The town I grew up in was full of chemical towns. It's chemical factories, rather. It is the main capital of the chemical industry in England. And so I was surrounded by chemical factories. And so we had no Greek temples. We had one old medieval church, a couple of maybe 18th century houses, but the whole thing was an industrial town. But we had lots of huge chemical factories. So I thought, okay, I'm going to build factories. I will be a chemical engineer. And that was until I was about 15. And then something begins to happen.
Mhm.
I got more and more interested in art and literature, and I began to get a little bit uh, well, it took me a couple of years before I really decided I no longer wanted to be a scientist or engineer, chemical or chemist. I liked designing engines, but they were all obsolete engines. I liked old steam engines, for instance. Um, so I kind of shifted when I was about 16, 17, slowly. And the consequence was, at the age of 18, when I finished school, I did not go to university for chemical engineering. I went to art school to study painting.
So what
See, I still,
motivated you for this shift?
sorry?
What did motivate you for such shift to art?
Uh, I became interested in things that had no clear explanation. The thing about a scientific problem is that in practice or in principle, there is always an answer if you do enough research.
Yes.
Why did this happen or how did it happen? You'll find out eventually. But I got more and more interested in things that had no possible explanation, that were to do with human psychology, uh, the imagination,
Mhm.
the poetical problems of our experience. And so um, I didn't become contemptuous of science. I revere science. One of my very best friends is a geophysicist. He was the head of our research institute in England, so Sir Duncan Wingham.
Mhm.
But I realized that it just also I have to say one other thing. I was no good at mathematics. It's hard to be a scientist without mathematics.
Of course.
But that wasn't the main reason. I think I could have probably got there. But I really became interested in it. And I always liked painting. I always liked painting. So, but I think already I knew that I really was interested in the history of art. I wanted to, but when I looked in the university prospectus, they wanted somebody who'd already studied Latin or Greek or Italian, and I didn't have that. So I thought, okay, I go to art school, and I got a place in one of the very best top art schools, Goldsmiths College in London, and I spent 4 years there. Um, but gradually, and I was very focused on modern art, 20th century art. Gradually, I got more and more interested in the history. And I thought, no, I've got to find a way to study history of art properly. Um, and I didn't do very well in the art school because I spent so much time in the library. So I finished at the art school and decided to apply again to another university if I could get a grant. And 2 years later, I got the grant and I went to another university and studied the history of art.
Mhm.
And it was there that I really discovered what we can call academic architectural history. Because the main part of the course was art history, painting and sculpture, but also courses in architecture. And I got very interested in how artwork, paintings and sculpture and installation became a big important influence in modern architecture, especially in the 1920s in Holland and Germany and Russia and Soviet Union, constructivism, Bauhaus, and so on. And I decided that that was the kind of field that I wanted to explore. However, I also discovered a lot about America. And so I went to study in New York for 3 months, and I made a lot of connections there. I even thought of applying to university there. So then I did fairly well this time and wanted to do postgraduate PhD, a doctorate. And I found a brilliant teacher named Joseph Rickwood. He only died last year. Polish Jewish refugee, came to England and became very, very famous architectural historian. And I joined his course at the University of Essex um, on architectural theory. Also, then I also made a great friends with an American artist named Dan Graham, who worked by making video installations and pavilions with two-way mirror glass that studied the interactions of people around mirrors and windows.